Early January 2025. In the darkness before dawn, a Ukrainian long-range unmanned aerial vehicle crossed hundreds of kilometers of Russian airspace and reached Engels 2 airbase. At first, the reports were fragmentary. Damaged facilities, disrupted logistics. Operations briefly paused. Nothing that looked decisive. Nothing that suggested collapse. Engels 2, however, is not an ordinary airfield. It sits at the center of Russia's strategic aviation network, supporting bomber forces that have shaped the war far beyond the front lines. Headlines moved quickly, labeling the strike a breakthrough or a turning point. History suggests caution. Modern warfare rarely shifts overnight. What matters is not what was hit, but what changed afterward. This is a closer look at what that night may have altered, and what it did not. Engels 2 matters because it is not built to fight battles at the edge of the map, but to sustain them over time, and that role makes it central to Russia's strategic air power. Located far from the front lines, the base functions as a deep rear hub where long-range aviation is kept alive, organized, and ready to operate. It supports Russia's nuclear-capable bomber force, but more importantly in this war, it enables conventional long-range strikes that reach cities, energy networks, and infrastructure hundreds of kilometers away. When Engels 2 works as planned, Russian commanders can launch strikes with confidence, knowing the aircraft, weapons, and crews are supported by a stable and protected system. That sense of depth is what separates a tactical airfield from a strategic backbone. The daily work at Engels 2 is less visible than combat footage, yet it is what turns aircraft into usable power. Two 95 and two 160 bombers rotate through the base on planned cycles, moving between maintenance, inspection, and mission preparation. Engines are checked, avionics are tested, and airframes are kept ready for repeated use rather than single flights. Missile loading is a slow and careful process, especially for long-range cruise missiles, and it requires secure storage, trained crews, and precise timing. Air crews also depend on the base for briefings, rest periods, and coordination before long missions that can last many hours. Without this rhythm, sortie planning breaks down, and even the most advanced bomber becomes an expensive object sitting on the ground. Engels 2 exists to prevent that breakdown by keeping every part of the process moving. The base also plays a direct role in Russia's long-range strike campaign through its connection to the Kh-101 cruise missile. These missiles are among the main tools Russia has used to strike targets deep inside Ukraine, especially during winter periods when energy systems become strategic targets. Engels 2 supports the storage, handling, and preparation of these weapons, linking production and transport to operational use. A single bomber sortie can carry missiles worth tens of millions of dollars, and each launch depends on logistics that must function without interruption. When that chain is disrupted, even briefly, planned strikes are delayed or canceled, and commanders are forced to revise schedules under pressure. In a war where timing often matters as much as firepower, that kind of disruption carries weight beyond the physical damage itself. Engels 2 has also been under pressure before, which makes the January 2025 strike part of a longer pattern rather than a sudden shock. Ukrainian forces have previously used long-range UAVs to reach the Engels region, testing Russian defenses and probing how deeply protected areas really are. These earlier attacks did not shut the base down, but they signaled that distance alone was no longer a guarantee of safety. Each incident added information, both for the attacker and the defender, about response times, coverage gaps, and likely reactions. Over time, these repeated efforts turned Engels 2 into a known target rather than an unthinkable one. That history matters because it shows the strike was not a gamble based on luck, but part of a gradual effort to challenge assumptions about rear area security. For Moscow, Engels 2 represents more than infrastructure because it stands for continuity and deterrence in a war that often feels unpredictable. Strategic aviation allows Russia to project power without moving ground forces, and it supports the idea that the state can strike when and where it chooses. The base embodies that promise by sitting far from danger while enabling action far beyond it. This is why Angles 2 is designed around protection and endurance, not quick movement or flexibility. Its value lies in being stable, reliable, and difficult to reach. When such a place comes under attack, the message is not that Russia has lost control, but that the old balance between distance and safety is under strain. To understand why the January strike was able to reach a base built on that assumption, it is necessary to look closely at how Angles 2 was defended before the attack. Angles 2 entered January 2025 in a state that looked calm, organized, and routine, which is often when strategic systems feel most confident. There were no emergency alerts, no visible signs of crisis, and no reason for crews to believe the base faced immediate danger. Daily operations continued as scheduled, aircraft moved through maintenance cycles, and air defense units followed standard procedures. This normal rhythm mattered because strategic bases are designed to function best when predictability holds. When nothing unusual appears on sensors or command screens, routines harden into habits, and habits quietly shape how threats are judged before they are fully understood. The backbone of Angles 2 air defense rested on long-range systems, especially the S-400, which had been deployed to protect against the threats Russian planners expected most. These systems are built to detect and destroy aircraft and cruise missiles flying fast and high, often hundreds of kilometers away. On paper, the coverage is impressive, with detection ranges that stretch far beyond the base itself. Against bombers, ballistic targets, or traditional missile attacks, this design makes sense. It reflects decades of thinking shaped by Cold War scenarios, where danger came from above, moved quickly, and announced itself clearly. In that context, distance was protection, and altitude was the main battlefield. That focus created a structural bias that shaped every layer beneath it. When defenses are optimized for speed and height, slower and lower targets tend to fade into the background. Low-altitude objects blend with terrain, weather, and civilian clutter, and they rarely match the threat profiles air defense crews are trained to prioritize. As a result, systems like the S-400 sit at the top of the hierarchy, while shorter-range assets carry the burden of watching what slips underneath. This arrangement works when low-flying threats are rare or simple, but it becomes strained when those threats grow more numerous, quieter, and more deliberate. Within this hierarchy, persistent low-altitude UAVs were treated as a secondary concern rather than a primary danger. They were not ignored, but they were ranked lower in urgency, especially when compared to high-speed missiles that could cause immediate destruction. This mattered because defensive systems are not only technical tools, but decision frameworks. Operators must choose where to look first, which signals deserve attention, and when to escalate responses. When doctrine places low-flying drones near the bottom of that list, reaction time slows, and small gaps are tolerated. Over time, those gaps stop feeling like risks and start feeling normal. This mindset reflects deeper assumptions formed before the war, when strategic depth was believed to equal safety. Angles 2 sits far from the front lines, and for years that distance acted as a shield. The logic was simple and comforting. If a base is far enough away, only advanced and expensive weapons can reach it, and those weapons can be tracked, identified, and intercepted. That belief shaped investment decisions, training priorities, and command expectations. It also encouraged the idea that rear area bases needed endurance more than adaptability, and stability more than constant change. The problem is that modern UAV warfare does not follow those older rules. Low-cost drones do not need speed or altitude to succeed, and they do not announce themselves like traditional threats. They exploit terrain, weather, and attention gaps, and they accept losses as part of the plan. Legacy air defense systems, even very capable ones, were not designed for this kind of pressure. They can detect and destroy individual targets, but they struggle when the threat is persistent, layered, and intentionally shaped to confuse priorities. This creates a growing gap between what defenses were built to stop and what they are now asked to face. At Angles 2, that gap did not invite an immediate strike, but it created space for something quieter and more patient. When defenders expect danger to arrive fast and loud, they are less prepared for threats that move slowly and blend in. Preparation becomes possible not because the defenses are weak, but because they are focused elsewhere. That opening mattered, because it allowed planning to unfold long before the first explosion or impact, and it shaped the conditions that followed when the attack finally came. The reconnaissance phase matters because it likely shaped the outcome long before any strike took place, even if much of it remains unseen. Reports point to Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs flying low along natural terrain, using rivers, tree lines, and ground contours to reduce exposure. This approach fits known UAV tactics because low-altitude flight limits radar visibility and blends movement into background noise. Modern electric drones produce little sound, and when combined with terrain masking, they can move through defended space without triggering immediate concern. For defenders used to watching the sky above rather than the ground below, such movement can look unremarkable until it becomes relevant. The tactical logic behind this method is simple and well-tested, and it does not rely on advanced technology. Rivers create natural corridors that guide navigation while keeping aircraft below line of sight detection, and uneven terrain breaks radar coverage into fragments. Flying low also shortens detection windows, leaving less time for human operators to react. In conflicts from the Middle East to Eastern Europe, similar techniques have allowed small UAVs to approach protected areas that once felt secure. This does not mean defenses fail completely, but it does mean they react later than expected, which is often enough for reconnaissance to succeed. The likely goals of such flights were narrow and practical rather than dramatic. Reconnaissance drones do not search blindly, because coordinates of fixed bases like Angles 2 are already known. Instead, they focus on confirming details that change over time. This includes whether high-value targets are exposed or sheltered, how patrols move through the area, and which facilities appear active or idle. Even small details matter, such as lighting patterns, vehicle movement, or heat signatures near storage areas. These observations help planners decide not only what to strike, but when to strike, and timing often determines success more than scale. At the same time, it is important to draw clear limits around what can be claimed with confidence. Open-source reporting does not confirm how long any reconnaissance UAV remained inside Russian airspace, how deeply it penetrated, or how much situational awareness it achieved. Some accounts describe hours of unchallenged flight, while others suggest far shorter windows. Without direct access to sensor logs or command records, these details remain uncertain. Treating estimates as facts risks turning analysis into storytelling, which weakens credibility rather than strengthening it. This is where the distinction between plausible tactics and unverified claims becomes critical. Terrain masking, low-altitude penetration, and patrol observation are all realistic methods supported by experience in other conflicts. Claims that extend beyond this, such as precise minute-by-minute mapping of entire defensive networks, should be treated with caution unless supported by evidence. Good analysis accepts uncertainty instead of filling gaps with certainty. In warfare, especially modern warfare, what is unknown often matters as much as what is confirmed. What can be stated with more confidence is the role reconnaissance plays in shaping outcomes. Strikes rarely succeed because of surprise alone, and they almost never succeed because of firepower by itself. They succeed because defenders are nudged into predictable behavior while attackers learn where attention is focused. Reconnaissance allows planners to identify habits, not just assets, and habits are easier to exploit than hardware. A defense system may be strong on paper, but if it reacts the same way each time, it becomes readable. That readability is what reconnaissance seeks to uncover. In the case of Angles 2, reconnaissance likely did not aim to prove that defenses were absent, but that they were oriented in a specific direction. Knowing where defenses look is often more valuable than knowing how many systems are present. Once that orientation is understood, planners can design actions that pull attention away from where it is needed most. This is why reconnaissance is often the quiet center of an operation, shaping decisions without drawing notice. When the attack finally came, it did not aim to overwhelm everything at once, but to force defenders to look in the wrong direction. The attack unfolded as a controlled sequence rather than a single burst of violence, and that design explains why it drew attention without seeking total destruction. Reports describe a swarm of relatively low-cost UAVs moving toward Angles 2 in coordinated waves, with each element assigned a specific role. These drones were not built to survive long missions, and they did not need to. Their purpose was to arrive, force reactions, and create pressure across the defense system. By using numbers instead of speed or heavy payloads, the attackers aimed to stretch attention and time, which are often the most limited resources during an air defense response. Decoys played a central role in shaping that response. Some UAVs climbed higher and changed their profiles to resemble more familiar threats, pulling radar focus upward and outward. This tactic did not require advanced deception technology, because air defense systems are trained to react quickly to signals that match known danger patterns. When those signals appear, procedures trigger almost automatically. Interceptors launch, tracking channels fill, and operators concentrate on what looks most urgent. In this case, urgency was carefully manufactured. By drawing eyes and systems toward altitude, the decoys encouraged defenders to confirm what they already expected to see. While attention shifted, the main body of UAVs stayed low and quiet, moving beneath the layers designed for fast and high targets. This phase was not about breaking through by force, but about slipping through during moments of distraction. Saturation mattered more than precision. Even capable systems struggle when multiple contacts appear at once, especially when some are real threats and others are not. Each additional signal adds delay, and small delays accumulate. Within such windows, low-flying drones can move closer without facing the full weight of the defense network. The attack also showed restraint in its objectives, which often signals planning rather than improvisation. Instead of chasing symbolic destruction of aircraft, reports suggest a focus on logistical infrastructure, particularly areas linked to KH-101 cruise missile storage. These facilities matter because they sit upstream from actual strikes. Damaging them does not produce dramatic images, but it disrupts schedules, forces inspections, and delays operations. Even limited harm can slow a launch cycle, especially when safety checks follow any suspected impact near stored munitions. In long-range aviation, missed timing can ripple through weeks of planning. The economic contrast between the attackers and defenders highlights why this method is difficult to counter. A low-cost UAV may be valued in the tens of thousands of dollars, while interceptors used against it can cost millions. This imbalance does not mean defenses are useless, but it does mean each response carries a price. When systems fire repeatedly against decoys or marginal threats, resources drain quickly. Ammunition stocks, maintenance hours, and crew endurance all become factors. Over time, the cost of defense begins to outweigh the cost of attack, especially when attacks are designed to recur rather than decide a war in one night. Claims about the scale of damage should be treated carefully, because confirmed data remains limited. Some reports describe large losses of stored missiles and long pauses in operations, while others point to partial disruption and rapid recovery. Satellite imagery and official statements offer fragments, not full clarity. In conflicts like this, early numbers often change as assessments improve. What can be stated with more confidence is that the attack achieved disruption, even if it fell short of total destruction. In strategic terms, disruption can be enough, because it forces commanders to respond, adapt, and reassess risk. The design of the strike suggests that success was measured by reaction rather than wreckage. By forcing air defenses to engage decoys, by pressuring logistics instead of airframes, and by accepting losses among cheap drones, the attackers shifted the balance of effort. The base did not collapse, and the system did not fail completely, but its rhythm was broken. That break is often where strategic impact begins, because it introduces uncertainty into planning that depends on stability. The immediate damage mattered, but the more important effects unfolded in the days that followed. The real impact of the Angles 2 strike appeared after the smoke cleared. because the response mattered more than the damage itself. In the days that followed, Russian planners did not treat the event as a minor incident, even though the base remained functional. Instead, they adjusted posture, movement, and protection in ways that signaled concern about repeat attacks. Strategic systems rarely change behavior unless confidence has been shaken, and the adjustments around Engels 2 suggest that old assumptions no longer felt safe. One of the most visible responses was the reported redeployment and dispersal of strategic bombers. Aircraft that once operated from a limited number of deep rear bases were moved farther east and spread across multiple locations. This reduced the risk of losing several assets in a single strike, but it also created new problems. Longer distances to launch points meant more flight hours before missions even began. Crews faced extended duty cycles, and aircraft accumulated wear faster. What looked like protection on the map translated into added strain in daily operations. Defensive measures around key bases were also strengthened, but reinforcement came with trade-offs. Additional short-range systems were positioned to cover low-altitude gaps, and patrol routines were tightened. These steps improved coverage, yet they increased complexity. More sensors, more crews, and more alert states raise the chance of fatigue and error over time. A defense network that stays on edge for too long becomes expensive to sustain, especially when threats are designed to appear often but strike selectively. Changes in basing behavior further illustrate how disruption can reshape strategy. Bases once chosen for efficiency and logistics were now judged through the lens of vulnerability. Storage areas, maintenance zones, and parking patterns were reconsidered, sometimes at the cost of speed. Aircraft that had been staged for rapid turnaround now required additional movement and coordination. Each added step reduced the pace of operations, even when no new attack occurred. In strategic aviation, slower tempo can blunt pressure just as effectively as physical losses. The cost of these adjustments shows up clearly in mission economics. Longer routes require more fuel, which increases demand on supply chains already under pressure. Extended flight hours accelerate maintenance cycles, pulling aircraft out of service more often. Spare parts, already constrained by sanctions and production limits, are consumed faster. While none of these effects stop operations outright, together they raise the price of every sortie. Over weeks and months, that price becomes a strategic factor rather than a temporary inconvenience. This is where disruption proves more powerful than destruction. Destroying an aircraft creates a clear loss, but disrupting a system forces continuous spending, planning changes, and attention shifts. The Engels 2 strike did not erase Russia's bomber force, but it altered how that force must operate. Commanders now plan with added uncertainty, knowing that distance alone no longer guarantees safety. That uncertainty spreads through schedules, budgets, and risk assessments, shaping decisions far beyond the original target area. Low-cost UAV operations play a central role in this shift because they pressure high-value systems into inefficient postures. A drone that costs little does not need to succeed every time to have impact. It only needs to force a response that costs more than the attack itself. When defenses must remain active, dispersed, and alert against frequent threats, efficiency drops. High-end assets are pulled into defensive roles, and flexibility shrinks. Over time, this dynamic favors persistence over power. The lesson from Engels 2 is not that drones replace traditional weapons, but that they change how those weapons are used. Strategic systems built for rare, decisive threats now face frequent, probing pressure. Each response drains resources and narrows options. Even when no follow-up attack comes, planners must assume it could. That assumption alone reshapes behavior, turning strong systems cautious and cautious systems slow. These changes point to a broader lesson that goes beyond a single airbase or a single night. The Engels 2 strike should not be sold as a sudden turning point, yet it cannot be brushed aside as symbolic noise. What happened in early January 2025 did not erase Russia's strategic aviation, but it forced it to hesitate, adjust, and spend more to achieve the same results. That pause alone matters. In modern warfare, Strategic depth is shrinking, and distance no longer protects what it once did. Expensive systems now face pressure from tools that are cheap, repeatable, and designed to exploit routine rather than break it. Engels 2 is still operating, but it is operating differently, under tighter rules and heavier caution. Aircraft are dispersed, missions are longer, and planning carries new doubt. The real cost is not counted in destroyed hardware, but in lost confidence and rising uncertainty that follows every decision. If you want clear, grounded analysis of how these shifts affect the balance of power, subscribe to Military Force and stay with us for what comes next.